This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Mrs. Caudle's Curtain Lectures by Douglas William Jerrold. Read by Martin Clifton. Introduction. Poor Job Caudle was one of the few men whom nature, in her casual bounty to women, sends into the world as patient listeners. He was, perhaps, in more respects than one, all ears. And these ears Mrs. Caudle, his lawful wedded wife, as she would ever and anon impress upon him, for she was not a woman to wear chains without shaking them, took whole and sole possession of. They were her entire property, as expressly made to convey to Caudle's brain the stream of wisdom that continually flowed from the lips of his wife, as was the tin funnel through which Mrs. Caudle, in vintage time, bottled her elder wine. There was, however, this difference between the wisdom and the wine. The wine was always sugared, the wisdom never. It was expressed crude from the heart of Mrs. Caudle, who, doubtless, trusted to the sweetness of her husband's disposition to make it agree with him. Philosophers have debated whether morning or night is most conducive to the strongest and clearest moral impressions. The Grecian sage confessed that his labours smelt of the lamp. In like manner did Mrs. Caudle's wisdom smell of the rushlight. She knew that her husband was too much distracted by his business as a toyman and doll merchant to digest her lessons in the broad day. Besides, she could never make sure of him. He was always liable to be summoned to the shop. Now, from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, there was no retreat for him. He was compelled to lie and listen. Perhaps there was little magnanimity in this on the part of Mrs. Caudle, but in marriage, as in war, it is permitted to take advantage of the enemy. Besides, Mrs. Caudle copied very ancient and classic authority. Minerva's bird, the very wisest thing in feathers, is silent all day. So was Mrs. Caudle. Like the owl, she hooted only at night. Mr. Caudle was blessed with an indomitable constitution. One fact will prove the truth of this. He lived 30 years with Mrs. Caudle, surviving her. Yes, it took 30 years for Mrs. Caudle to lecture and dilate upon the joys, griefs, duties and vicissitudes comprised within that seemingly small circle, the wedding ring. We say seemingly small, for the thing, as viewed by the vulgar naked eye, is a tiny hoop made for the third feminine finger. Alack, like the ring of Saturn, for good or evil, it circles a whole world. Or, to take a less gigantic figure, it compasses a vast region. It may be Arabia Felix, and it may be Arabia Petrea. A lemon-hearted cynic might liken the wedding ring to an ancient circus, in which wild animals claw one another for the support of lookers-on. Perish the hyperbole. We would rather compare it to an elfin ring, in which dancing fairies made the sweetest music for infirm humanity. Manifold are the uses of rings. Even swine are tamed by them. You will see a vagrant, hilarious, devastating porker, a full-blooded fellow that would bleed into many, many fathoms of black pudding. You will see him escaped from his proper home, straying in a neighbour's garden. How he tramples upon the heartsease, how, with quivering snout, he roots up lilies' odoriferous bulbs. Here he gives a reckless snatch at thyme and marjoram, and here he munches violets and gillyflowers. At length the marauder is detected, seized by his owner, and driven, beaten, home. To make the porker less dangerous, it is determined that he shall be ringed. The sentence is pronounced, execution ordered. Listen to his screams. Would you not think the knife was in his throat, and yet they're only boring through his nose? Hence, for all future time, the porker behaves himself with a sort of forced propriety, for in either nostril he carries a ring. It is, for the greatness of humanity, a saddening thought that sometimes men must be treated no better than pigs. But Mr. Job Caudle was not of these men. Marriage to him was not made a necessity. No, for him, call it, if you will, a happy chance, a golden accident. It is, however, enough for us to know that he was married, and was therefore made the recipient of a wife's wisdom. Mrs. Caudle, like Mahomet's dove, continually pecked at the good man's ears, and it is a happiness to learn from what he left behind that he had hived all her sayings in his brain, and further, that he employed the mellow evening of his life to put such sayings down, that in due season they might be enshrined in imperishable type. When Mr. Job Caudle was left in his Brierly world without his daily guide and nocturnal monitress, he was in the ripe fullness of 57. For 3 hours at least after he went to bed, such slaves are we to habit, he could not close an eye. His wife still talked at his side. True it was, she was dead and decently interred. His mind, it was a comfort to know it, could not wander on this point. This he knew. Nevertheless, his wife was with him. The ghost of her tongue still talked as in the life, and again did Job Caudle hear the monitions of bygone years. At times so loud, so lively, so real were the sounds, that Job, with a cold chill, doubted if he were really widowed. And then, with the movement of an arm, a foot, he would assure himself that he was alone in his Holland. Nevertheless, the talk continued. It was terrible to be thus haunted by a voice, to have advice, commands, remonstrance, all sorts of saws and adages still poured upon him, and no visible wife. Now did the voice speak from the curtains, now from the tester, and now did it whisper to Job from the very pillow that he pressed. "It's a dreadful thing that her tongue should walk in this manner," said Job, and then he thought confusedly of exorcism, or at least of counsel from the parish priest. Whether Job followed his own brain or the wise direction of another we know not, but he resolved every night to commit to paper one curtain lecture of his late wife. The employment would possibly lay the ghost that haunted him. It was her dear tongue that cried for justice, and when thus satisfied, it might possibly rest in quiet. And so it happened. Job faithfully chronicled all his late wife's lectures. The ghost of her tongue was thenceforth silent, and Job slept all his after nights in peace. When Job died, a small packet of papers was found inscribed as follows: "Curtain lectures delivered in the course of 30 years by Mrs. Margaret Caudle, and suffered by Job her husband." That Mr. Caudle had his eye upon the future printer is made pretty probable by the fact that in most places he had affixed the text, such text for the most part arising out of his own daily conduct, to the lecture of the night. He had also, with an instinctive knowledge of the dignity of literature, left a bank note of very fair amount with the manuscript. Following our duty as editor, we trust we have done justice to both documents. End of chapter.